Hi, my name is Michelle Hetman. I use pronouns she and her, and I am delighted to welcome you to one of our last sessions of Tuesdays at the Table. It's a time when we're having conversation together around the connection, and we are so glad that you're with us this morning. I have a special guest with me today, Reverend Dr. Jay Williams. He is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, serving as the lead pastor currently of Union Church, Boston. He's also served many congregations in New York City, Boston, San Francisco, including Glide Memorial. He is a leader in our denomination. He is wonderful, and I am so excited that I get to chat with him this morning and that you all get to join the conversation with us. So we're gonna jump in, and Jay, I'm wondering if you would tell us anything more that we should know about you, your background and your interests as a theologian. How do you bring yourself to conversations around theology?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I'm really delighted to be here, to be kind of at table today as we think about going to the font, baptism. And, I come to this work as a theologian, primarily as a pastor, right? As a pastor who is also a child of the church, raised in the church. And the church has helped me to embody, right, the love of God, and then to love me into freedom, right? So all of my thinking and writing and preaching and teaching, it's grounded in the gift of being baptized as a child and nurtured in the church, and then nourished and nurtured into my call as a pastor who gets to preside at baptisms. And I think one of the ways I really want to describe kind of who I am and the way I think about theology, and particularly the theology of baptism, is by telling you a brief story about a baptism that I got to preside over earlier this year. Right, it was actually the first sacramental act, the first sacrament in worship that we celebrated after the pandemics. And there was this deep sacramental hunger in my community, like so many communities. So in June of this year, I was able to preside over the baptism of one of the newest members of Union, James Delta, right, who was born on Juneteenth of last year in the midst of a pandemic, right? And his family comes from Texas, white family in a historically Black church. His family comes from Texas. He's born here in Boston, and they asked that he be baptized on, his birthday, Juneteenth, 2021. And there was so much significance in this act as we are emerging from the delays and disruptions of pandemic, but also, right, what Juneteenth signifies, and to be able to baptize on Juneteenth, because they're both about freedom, right? They're both about liberation, and we were able to then name, right? And Juneteenth, I should say, Juneteenth is right that annual celebration, which is now a national holiday, thankfully, but it's always been a national holiday. It's known as Freedom Day, Independence Day, for Black people. And it was when in 1865, June 19th, 1865, Black people, enslaved Black people in Galveston, Texas, received word that the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1, 1863 had freed them. Right? They didn't get the news that they were free until 2.5 years later. So to be able to baptize James Delta, right, on Juneteenth of this year was a way of embodying and living out the best hope of what baptism offers us. As the baptismal vows say, right, the freedom that God gives us. So sometimes we get the news late. We haven't quite fully embodied the news that we are free and set free. But that's the gift of baptism, the gift of water, that we might be able to claim liberation and life and love. So it's that story, right? This intersection of white family from Texas, historically Black church in Boston, queer man, queer pastor, worlds apart in some ways, but yet becoming community together, being church together, being initiated, brought together into a sacred sacramental community. That's what baptism is, and that is how I identify myself as a theologian who lives at the intersections and claims that God lives at the intersections with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that beautiful introduction and story. And that really is what church is and what church should be. So I feel like we can be done. No, I'm kidding. We'll keep going. So I would love to hear from you. I mean, we know as United Methodist, General Conference adopted a document on the United Methodist understanding of baptism. If you haven't read it, folks, we would invite you to read it. It is called By Water and the Spirit. So Reverend Williams, I wonder if you would talk a little bit about, what's the significance of both parts of the title, water and the Spirit in our United Methodist understanding of baptism?
Sure. Yeah. And in some ways, right, I can show you better than I can tell you.
Yeah.
So I would love to show you a powerful video that we use at Union. It's our assistant pastor and our director of music with a video that interprets the great hymn, Wash, O God, our sons and daughters. And it tries to bring alive, right, the meaning of those words that we find in the hymn, but also in By Water and the Spirit. So maybe we can take a look.
Okay, perfect.
Wash, O God, our sons and daughters, where your cleansing waters flow. Number them among your people, bless as Christ blessed long ago. Weave them garments bright and sparkling, compass them with love and light. Fill, anoint them, send your Spirit, holy dove and heart's delight. We who bring them long for nurture, by your milk may we be fed. Let us join your feast partaking, cup of blessing, living bread. God, renew us, guide our footsteps, free from sin and all of its snares, one with Christ in living, dying, by your Spirit
right? And I guess what I want to say about it is like there's this scene, right, towards the end where the woman in the water is just hands lifted and turning and like this expression of freedom. And that's what, when we say by water and the Spirit, is that, right, the power of the Spirit frees us. Like, so something extraordinary comes to refresh us, to set us free through these ordinary, everyday things. And that's what, when these words that of course are the echoes, they're echoes in the baptismal ritual itself. All right, the covenant, and it's in the introduction, it's in the thanksgiving over the water, it's in the prayer after the baptism, that through water and Spirit, extraordinary change can happen, and that we can become the conduit of Spirit power as those who are baptized into a community that claims, right? Of course, John Wesley talks about these ordinary means of God's grace that comes to us. So yeah, the symbols of water, the source of life. Without water, there is no life. Without Spirit, there is no life. Without breath. So they come together and they play off of each other in this dynamic movement of like that is both powerful and gentle, refreshing and invigorating.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that beautiful music with us, that beautiful prayer. And if anyone wants to, find more, you can always go to the Union Church Boston website and worship with them and, see all different kinds of things. So yeah, thank you. And the ordinary acts, that's always such a good reminder for us that water, I mean, we see water everywhere. We are made of water. And God uses that. So
Absolutely.
yeah. All right. So, in our service of baptism, and the claims that in baptism, we are initiated into Christ's holy church, incorporated into God's mighty acts of salvation, and given new birth. All right. So these, I mean, we've heard this before. These seem like promises. They seem like big promises. So, what do they mean?
Yeah,
Talk about that a little bit.
Right. They are promises, right? They're big promises that the church makes to the baptized, but also that the church makes to itself, right? So it's part of the baptismal ritual in the United Methodist tradition, right? We always do it in community, so we shy away from like private baptisms. They're done in the context of worship because we're promising that to the baptized child or adult, that this community will journey with you and will love you and teach you and walk alongside of you in the ways that lead to life. So right, the words of the service, right, being initiated, incorporated. So it becomes a ritual of welcome to say that you are part of us and I'm part of you, and we choose one another. And we commit to one another to be faithful to one another. And we are one in the same in the beauty of our diversity, right? So as I was saying earlier, these intersections, these, right, different colors, different experiences, different, economic class and status, we all become one and we get to make a choice to be one another. And I think the last thing I want to say is, right, this ritual of welcoming when we make a promise is a gift that in its best form, right, helps us to live into this freedom, right? The freedom that God gives us to resist evil and injustice and oppression in whatever forms they come to us, as the ritual says. But like if you're welcome to a party, a dinner party at a friend's house or something like this, right? You're not welcomed in and then like told to stand here and not to talk to anyone. Right? What the ritual is about creating hospitality. So we, in this promise, we create hospitality that is grounded in God's act of creation that first invites us, right? So we invite to the font as we then later invite to the table of communion because Christ first loved us and God invited us. So that, in the Wesleyan Methodist way is to say baptism is rooted in the prevenient grace of God that comes to us before we even recognize it. So then there is really nothing that can compromise that promise. Not an act of the church, not an act of the pastor or the congregation. That promise that we make is actually predicated, right, on the promise of the God who loves us into freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is a big question right now is, we talk a lot about welcome and about hospitality and all of that. So I do think a question is, once someone is baptized, like, is there anything that can be done to reverse or invalidate it, including someone's sexuality?
Yeah, the simple answer is no.
Right.
Just like no, full stop. But it's a real question because there are some ways in which the church, the denomination, in the ways in which we've lived into doctrine and dogma, has made this question, I think, less cut and dry than it actually is. In other words, like the abundant and amazing grace of God, right, is an act of God that comes before anything else, right? So therefore, logically speaking, there is nothing that can invalidate or reverse what God is doing, right? And God created me, a queer gay man, in God's image, and blesses me and those who love like me, and those of varying gender expressions, sexual orientations, like in the fullness, right? A God whose ways are not our ways, whose thoughts are not our thoughts, who created in love for us to be loved and to experience the fullness of that agape love, right? So the divine gift that comes to us that is reflected in baptism, right? As we claim the waters of creation, the waters of the womb in which we are nurtured, there's nothing that can stand in the way or separate us. But in fact, in its best form, the baptismal waters and the covenants that we make to one another, in its best sense, helps us to live into the fullness of our creation. Right, so I'll stop with this. Like Paul, Paul gets some things wrong, but also gets some things right. And that right at the end of chapter 8 in Romans, right after one of the subtitles is "Life in the Spirit," says, right, I am convinced, right, I am persuaded, and that's the work of a theologian, right, to persuade, to convince. So I am convinced that nothing, not life or death, nor powers or principalities or things on heaven or things on earth, nothing can separate us from the love of God through Christ Jesus our Lord. So if the church that claims to be the baptized community would fully embody that nothing can separate us or deny, and that therefore nothing should separate us, then we might be living into the hope in the future that is promised to us.
Yeah, amen. Thanks for sharing all that. I think that's a really important conversation that we're having right now. So we appreciate your thoughts and your leadership in that realm. You mentioned
Michelle.
covenant. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned covenant. I'm wondering if you could just dive in a little bit, just briefly. I know we talk so much about covenant, but what is it that makes the baptismal covenant like different than a normal covenant? Different than just kind of also what is covenant for folks?
Yeah.
We could talk about that. It's important.
Sure. Yeah, right. I mean, covenant, right, is one of those churchy words that you often hear in the context of rituals, like the baptismal covenant, but marriage covenants, and in the context of these sacred communities and sacred gatherings. But so I mean, in some ways, right, a covenant is like a super promise, right? It's a promise that has like even deeper meaning, right? So like, let me give you an example. Like, okay, we make promises all the time. I promise I won't be late, and then my car breaks down, right? I promise if I get a new credit card, I promise to pay on time, and then a pandemic hits, and there's actually not enough money to do these things. So these promises, like kind of mundane, everyday, sometimes, right, we break, even though we have our best intention at heart. But like a covenant is done often, like not just between like two individuals, but in the context of a community where there is meaning and accountability, that the promise, right, it drops down from just being something we say, right, with our mouths. So it drops down from head into heart. And it's grounded in the love of that community that holds one accountable when, right, the covenant is at risk of being broken, right? To accept the freedom that God gives you to resist evil, injustice, oppression, whatever forms they present themselves, right? So without the church, outside of the church, but also within the church, we have a covenantal responsibility to call out the oppression and injustice in many ways that is experienced by queer folks like myself in the church. And the living out, even when we don't fully understand difference and diversities of sexuality and gender expressions, that's a form of prevenient grace. We don't quite fully understand everything, but still God's love is present, and God's love comes first. So the love of God is not predicated on our understanding. So covenant accountability in the church says we must love each other into freedom, even when we don't understand the choices or the lifestyles or the identities that other people have. So covenant, right, is a matter literally of life and death. I mean, and if we, like, historically speaking, right, when a covenant was made, like back in biblical days, it was a form of like ritual sacrifice. The two parties, they would literally cut a covenant. That's what it meant. So they cut an animal and they walked through it, which was a sign of the significance of the act of covenant making, but also like a warning, right? If you break the covenant, you'll suffer the same fate as this slain animal. Now, this, of course, I'm not saying like that we need to be violent in those ways in any means, but what it signifies, right, is that yes, this is matter of life and flourishing and freedom, and we're doing something really big here, really significant here when we make a promise in covenantal community.
Yeah, definitely. I'm vegetarian, so I'm grateful we're not going back to the splitting animals part of
Right.
I
right.
think,
I'm trying to become a pescatarian.
yes.
Right.
I think anytime we can remind ourselves of covenant, I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of worshiping together is when we do a remembrance of our baptism,
Yeah.
And remind ourselves of the baptismal covenant. And I love, I mean, such a simple way of just like big promise. Like it is a big promise in so many ways. So yeah, I think we can all remember that, and we can all, remember our baptisms today in this moment, and what was promised, and what was, what God continues to promise in that. So yeah, absolutely. God, baptism is great.
Yes, it
sacrament.
is.
Yeah. So we're almost to the end of our time together today. I can't believe it, but I would just love, to finish up by, we're talking a lot about, there are lots of unknowns in our world right now. There are lots of unknowns in our church. And I'm wondering how, how can our understandings of baptism impact how we're thinking about the future of our church?
Yeah. If we claim our baptism, there is a future for the church, right? Even in the midst of uncertainty, even in the midst of division, and some form of separation. We reminded that nothing separates us from the love of God. So I think claiming off our baptism is an opportunity to say, look, after all that we've been through over the last 2 years of a pandemic that has cut to the core and that has destabilized and disrupted us, and all that our denomination has faced for decades and decades before, right? The lightning rod of sexuality. So I'm talking about the ways in which institutional racism and discrimination has done violence and damage, the ways in which institutional sexism and all forms of oppression have harmed us. The church needs to be refreshed, right? The church needs to be renewed. It's literally a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
And if we think about our future in terms of this threefold Wesleyan way of interpreting baptism through prevenient and justifying and sanctifying grace, that this is an act of God that we choose to participate in. We come into being through God's grace. So we might come into being as a newly refreshed church, grounded in God's grace, that requires a change of heart. Like something does have to change, right? So this conversion, the evangelical sense of, there is good news that convicts us so that we live differently. We have to live differently. And then, of course, sanctifying grace, that this is not about simply one person or one group, one sect of the church, that this is about a community that is sanctified, that is moving on to perfection, refreshed, renewed, so that we might bear witness, right? That we might bear witness to the world, not of our division, but of God's love. So we have a choice, right? Back to the freedom. We have a choice. We actually can, as a church, be other than who we are or have been. The question for us as we strive to be that baptized community of God is, do we choose freedom? Will we choose love? Will we choose flourishing and live out our vows to the fullest?
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we can all ponder what would it look like today to really claim our baptisms together. So we're gonna leave it at that. If you have thoughts, we thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. If you have thoughts, we would love to see them in the comments and we can interact back and forth that way. We invite you to continue to be a part of this conversation. It is such a hard time in the life of our church, but it's also an exciting time. And there is grace and there is promise of new life. And we will continue to be praying for all of you. Reverend Williams, I thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all of your witness, your wisdom. And we'll continue to be praying for you and your ministry. I know that it is a busy season for all of
Indeed.
us. So yeah, we thank you for taking time and for your leadership in our denomination. Gives us hope, and I think that's what we are all looking for right now, right? Is hope together. And yeah, so continue to be a part of the conversation, and we hope you have a great Tuesday.
Peace.